Champagne flutes shattered against the marble floor as the jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. The entire ballroom froze, staring at the trembling, humiliated assistant dripping in red wine, her heavy cheeks burning from the vicious insults. Then a low, lethal voice sliced through the absolute silence. "No one touches her." Celeste Wilson was fat. It wasn't a secret, nor was it a tragic medical mystery. She had a heavy, soft body, thick thighs that rubbed together when she walked, and a noticeable double chin when she angled her face down to scrutinize financial ledgers. In the hyper-glamorous, violently cutthroat world of the Chicago underworld, women were usually lethal supermodels, sharp-edged and terrifyingly thin. Celeste, with her stretched cardigans and practical orthopedic heels, looked entirely out of place. Yet she was the most powerful woman in the Russo syndicate. Damien Russo did not care about aesthetics when it came to his business operations. He cared about loyalty, intelligence, and ruthlessness. Celeste possessed all three in spades. At 32, Damien was the undisputed head of the syndicate, a man whose tailored Italian suits hid an array of knife scars, and whose ice-blue eyes could paralyze a rival boss mid-sentence. He was a phantom, an urban legend who controlled the docks, the unions, and a vast legal front company known as Russo Logistics. And Celeste was the engine that kept his machine running. She had started as a low-level data entry clerk 5 years ago, when a rival family tried to launder dirty money through their front. It was Celeste who noticed the discrepancy, locked down the accounts, and calmly walked into Damien's office, uninvited, to hand him the proof. She hadn't flinched when his bodyguards drew their weapons. She had simply adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, handed over the manila folder, and said, "You're leaking $3 million a quarter, Mr. Russo. I fixed it. Please approve the security patch." From that day on, she was untouchable in an administrative sense. She became his executive assistant, his confidant, and the only person allowed to walk into his private study without knocking. But while Celeste commanded respect over encrypted emails and phone calls, physical reality was often far less forgiving. It was a cold Tuesday evening, when the tension started to build toward the breaking point. The Vanguard Gala, a high society charity event hosted by the city's elite, was approaching. Damien was using the event to solidify a merger with a legitimate tech conglomerate, effectively washing billions of syndicate dollars clean. Celeste sat at her sprawling mahogany desk outside Damien's office, rubbing her temples. Her desk was a fortress of monitors, secure phones, and stacked dossiers. She wore a dark navy dress that clung too tightly to her broad hips, a concession she made to the corporate dress code. The heavy oak doors of the inner sanctum opened, and Damien stepped out. He was imposing, standing 6'3", radiating an aura of barely contained violence. He paused by her desk, leaning his knuckles against the wood. "The transport from Miami?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that always made Celeste's pulse skip an entirely unprofessional beat. "Rerouted through Atlanta," Celeste replied, not looking up from her screen to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "The feds have a checkpoint on I-95. I sent the drivers the new coordinates an hour ago. The cargo is safe." Damien stared at her for a long moment. Celeste could feel the weight of his gaze. She was acutely aware of how she looked right now, exhausted, her hair frizzy, the soft flesh of her stomach pressing against the edge of the desk. She knew Damien dated women who graced the covers of Vogue. She was just the reliable workhorse. "Good," Damien finally said. "You're coming to the Vanguard Gala on Friday." Celeste's hands froze on the keyboard. She snapped her head up, her brown eyes wide behind her glasses. "Excuse me. Sir, I am an administrative assistant." "I don't attend. You're the only one who knows the complete face sheet of the tech conglomerate's board," Damien interrupted seamlessly. "I need you in my ear, feeding me the dynamics. You'll be on the floor." "Damien, no," Celeste pleaded, momentarily forgetting the formalities. "I don't belong there. The people who attend those events, they aren't exactly welcoming to people who look like me." Damien's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. He looked genuinely confused by her statement. "You look like the woman who runs my empire," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Buy a dress. Expense it to the company. Be ready by 8. Celeste watched him walk away, a heavy dread settling in her stomach. She knew the elite circles. They were vicious. They were bored. And to them, a fat, plain assistant, stepping into their glittering world, was nothing but a prime target for entertainment. The crystal ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk, expensive cologne, and predatory smiles. The chandeliers cast a golden glow over the city's wealthiest and most corrupt, all mingling under the guise of philanthropy. Celeste stood near a towering ice sculpture, trying to make herself as small as humanly possible. A nearly impossible feat, she bitterly reminded herself. She was wearing a custom-tailored black velvet gown. It was expensive, elegant, and designed to flatter her heavy frame. But Celeste still felt like an imposter wrapped in luxury. Her dark hair was swept up, and for once, she wore contacts instead of her glasses. She had an earpiece tucked discreetly into her right ear, holding a tablet disguised as a velvet clutch. Across the room, Damien was holding court. He looked devastatingly handsome in a midnight blue tuxedo, smoothly navigating the sharks of the corporate world. "The man in the grey suit approaching you on your left is Arthur Pendleton," Celeste murmured into the microphone, hidden in her neckline. "He's desperate. His stock dropped 14% yesterday. Don't offer him more than 40 cents on the dollar." "Understood." Damien's voice crackled softly in her ear, steady and reassuring. For the first hour, everything went perfectly. Celeste remained in the shadows, sipping sparkling water and directing Damien like a master chess player. But the shadows couldn't protect her forever. Enter Cameron Smith. Cameron was the heir to the Smith shipping empire, a silver spoon billionaire with a notorious cocaine habit and a vicious streak a mile wide. He was also a crucial, albeit annoying, pawn in Damien's legitimate shipping routes. Cameron was loud, severely intoxicated, and currently looking for someone to belittle to impress the sycophants trailing behind him. Celeste saw him coming and tried to turn away, retreating toward the catering doors. But Cameron, flanked by 2 rail-thin socialites in sequined dresses, intercepted her. "Well, well, well," Cameron sneered, blocking her path. His eyes raked over Celeste's full figure, his lips curling into a look of absolute disgust. "If it isn't Rousseau's little desk jockey, or should I say, large desk jockey," the socialites giggled, covering their mouths. Celeste kept her face entirely blank, a survival tactic she had perfected years ago. She took a step to the side. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith. I have business to attend to." Cameron stepped into her path again, invading her personal space. The stench of high-end scotch and stale smoke rolled off him. "Business? What business? Did the catering staff run out of hors d'oeuvres? Is that why you're panicking?" Celeste felt the familiar sting of humiliation prick at the corners of her eyes, but she swallowed it down. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Smith." Before she could move, Cameron reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His grip was entirely too tight, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Celeste gasped, dropping her velvet-covered tablet. "I'm talking to you, fatty," Cameron spat, his voice rising, carrying over the ambient noise of the ballroom. Heads began to turn. The jazz quartet's music seemed to fade into the background. "I've always wondered why Russo keeps a beached whale on his payroll. Does he pay you in donuts? Or maybe you just sit on his enemies to suffocate them?" The laughter from Cameron's entourage grew louder, emboldening him. Other guests stopped their conversations, turning to watch the spectacle. Celeste was paralyzed. She could feel the burning stares of 100 wealthy, beautiful people pinning her to the floor. The shame was a physical weight, crushing her chest. "Let go of me," Celeste whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. She tried to yank her arm away, but Cameron held on, a cruel, malicious light in his eyes. "Or what?" Cameron taunted. He took his full glass of red wine and, with a deliberate, mocking flick of his wrist, tipped it forward. The dark, crimson liquid splashed across Celeste's chest, soaking into the black velvet of her bodice, dripping down her pale skin, and ruining the dress she had so anxiously chosen. Celeste stopped breathing. The cold wine seeped into her skin. The humiliation was absolute, suffocating, tearing away every ounce of professional armor she had built over the years. She was just the fat girl again, being bullied in front of the whole school. Only now the school was a ballroom of billionaires. "Oops," Cameron laughed loudly. "Looks like you sprung a leak." Celeste squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Mr. Smith." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It possessed a dark, magnetic gravity that instantly sucked the air out of the ballroom. Cameron froze. The laughter of the socialites abruptly choked off. Damien Russo stood 10 feet away. Celeste opened her eyes to look at her boss, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She had seen Damien angry. She had seen him ruthless. But she had never, in 5 years, seen him look like this. His ice-blue eyes were almost black, dilated with a raw, primal fury that terrified every mob boss in the city. The elegant, sophisticated veneer of the businessman was completely gone, replaced by the apex predator of the Chicago underworld. He wasn't looking at Celeste's ruined dress. He was looking at Cameron's hand, which was still firmly wrapped around Celeste's arm. Damien took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted violently, people practically scrambling over themselves to get out of his path. Cameron's arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a twitch of nervous panic. "Damien, hey, I was just having a little fun with your—" "Take your hand off her," Damien said. The words were spoken softly, yet they echoed like thunderclaps in the silent room. Cameron, too drunk and too stupid to realize he was standing on a landmine, scoffed and tightened his grip slightly. "Come on, Russo, she's just a fat secretary. I was just—" He never finished the sentence. Damien moved with a terrifying, liquid speed. In a fraction of a second, he closed the distance. His large hand shot out, clamping around Cameron's throat. The force of the impact lifted Cameron entirely off his feet. Cameron released Celeste instantly, his hands flying up to claw desperately at Damien's iron grip. His face rapidly turned a mottled shade of purple. Celeste stumbled back, gasping for air, clutching her ruined dress. Damien didn't look at Cameron, even as the billionaire choked and thrashed in his grip, suspended in the air. Instead, Damien finally turned his gaze to Celeste. He took in her trembling form, the red wine dripping from her chin, the tears welling in her eyes, and the red mark forming on her arm where Cameron had grabbed her. A lethal, bone-chilling growl erupted from Damien's chest, vibrating through the silent ballroom. He turned his attention back to the gasping man in his hand. "No one touches her." Damien's grip was unyielding. Cameron Smith, the billionaire golden boy, dangled inches above the marble floor, his manicured hands desperately clawing at the thick, scarred wrist of the Mafia boss. Cameron's eyes bulged, the arrogant sneer replaced by the terrifying realization of his own mortality. The ballroom was locked in a deathly silence. The city's wealthiest elites, CEOs, judges, and socialites, were completely paralyzed. No one dared to intervene. They all knew the rumors about Damien Russo, but seeing the sheer, unbridled violence radiating from him in a high society setting was entirely different. With a look of utter disgust, Damien casually tossed Cameron to the side as if he weighed nothing. Cameron hit the polished marble floor hard, gasping aggressively, clutching his bruised throat as he scrambled backward like a frightened animal. Damien didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward and brought the heel of his Italian leather shoe down squarely onto Cameron's right hand, the same hand that had bruised Celeste's arm. A sickening crack echoed through the cavernous room. Cameron shrieked, a high-pitched, agonizing sound that made the socialites flinch and look away. "You are done in Chicago," Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, cold and absolute. "Your father's shipping contracts are void. Your operations belong to me. If I see your face in this city by sunrise, I will ship you back to your family in pieces." He didn't wait for a response. Damien turned his back on the whimpering billionaire and walked over to Celeste. The terrifying predator instantly vanished, replaced by something entirely different. He shrugged off his custom midnight blue tuxedo jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders, covering the wine-soaked bodice of her velvet gown. The heavy fabric smelled of cedar and expensive cologne, enveloping her in his protective warmth. "Come," he murmured, placing a warm hand on the small of her back. He guided her out of the crystal ballroom, the crowd parting for them like the Red Sea. Celeste kept her head high, though her knees trembled with every step. When they finally reached the idling black SUV in the underground garage, Celeste collapsed into the plush leather seat, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. The drive to Damien's private residence, a sprawling, fortified penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, was completely silent. Celeste stared out the tinted window, the streetlights illuminating the tears she angrily wiped away. She hated crying. She hated feeling weak. But the public humiliation, the sheer venom in Cameron's voice when he called her a beached whale, had shattered the professional armor she wore so meticulously. When they arrived at the penthouse, Damien led her to his sprawling master bathroom. It was a masterpiece of black marble and brushed gold. "There are fresh towels in the cabinet and a robe on the hook," Damien said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Take your time, Celeste. I'll be in the study." 30 minutes later, Celeste emerged. She had scrubbed the sticky, dried wine from her skin and tied her damp hair into a messy bun. She was wearing Damien's dark silk robe, which wrapped comfortably around her full figure. She found Damien standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, pouring 2 glasses of amber scotch. "I'm sorry," Celeste said quietly, breaking the silence. She wrapped her arms around her thick waist, feeling incredibly self-conscious. "I ruined the merger gala. I should have just walked away." Damien slammed his glass onto the mahogany desk. The sharp sound made her jump. "Never apologize for another man's disrespect," Damien growled, closing the distance between them. He stopped just inches away, his towering frame forcing her to tilt her head up to meet his intense gaze. "You ruined nothing. Cameron Smith ruined himself. "He's right, though, Damien," Celeste whispered, a tear slipping down her round cheek. "I don't belong in that world. Look at me. I'm not like the women you bring to those events. I'm heavy. I'm plain. I'm just your assistant." Damien's eyes darkened. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently framing her face. His thumbs carefully wiped away her tears. "You are the smartest, most fiercely loyal woman I have ever met," Damien said, his voice thick with raw emotion. He let his hands trail down her neck, resting on her broad shoulders, sliding down to grip her soft, full hips with absolute reverence. "You think I care about the plastic starving mannequins in that ballroom? They are empty. You, Celeste, you are everything. I have been out of my mind with want for you since the day you marched into my office and demanded I fix my security protocols." Celeste's breath hitched. She stared up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Damien." Before she could process his words, her encrypted company phone, resting on the desk, buzzed with a sharp, high-priority alarm. The shrill sound shattered the intimate moment. Celeste frowned, her instincts instantly taking over. She pulled away from Damien, adjusting the heavy silk robe, and picked up the device. Her eyes scanned the glowing screen, and the blood drained from her face. "What is it?" Damien asked, his romantic demeanor instantly shifting back to the ruthless syndicate boss. "It's a silent alarm from the Vanguard offshore accounts," Celeste said, her fingers flying across the screen. She rushed over to Damien's secure desktop, booted the system, and bypassed the firewall with her administrative credentials. Rows of green code reflected in her brown eyes. "Damien," she breathed, tracing the digital footprints. Cameron Smith wasn't just being a drunk, entitled bully tonight. He was creating a distraction. Damien stepped behind her, looking over her shoulder. "Explain." "Look at the time stamps," Celeste pointed to the screen. "The moment he confronted me, the moment the entire ballroom stopped to watch him pour wine on me, my monitoring tablet went offline because I dropped it. During that exact 4-minute window of chaos, a backdoor protocol was triggered in the Russo Logistics mainframe." She typed furiously, pulling up a highly classified banking ledger. "They bypassed our security. A wire transfer of $85 million was just pushed through the network, routed away from the Vanguard merger, and funneled directly into a private wealth management account at Julius Baer Group in Zurich." Damien's jaw locked. The Moretti crime family, his biggest rivals, used Julius Baer. The Smith family wasn't just incompetent. They were actively funding Damien's enemies, using his own laundered money. "Richard Smith," Damien hissed, naming Cameron's father. "He used his idiot son to sideline my chief architect so he could steal my capital." Celeste's eyes hardened. The vulnerability and shame from earlier completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Cameron Smith hadn't just insulted her body. He had insulted her intelligence. He had used her trauma as a smokescreen. "They think they got away with it," Celeste said, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet tone that perfectly mirrored her boss's. "They think because they used a decentralized Swiss routing number, we can't trace it back or stop the clearing process." She looked up at Damien, the reflection of the monitors illuminating her fierce expression. "They forgot who built your financial empire, Mr. Russo." "What do you need?" Damien asked, stepping back to give her absolute command of the room. He didn't call his enforcers. He didn't order a hit squad. He looked at Celeste with a profound, terrifying pride, recognizing that her mind was far deadlier than any firearm in his arsenal. 10 minutes of uninterrupted bandwidth and your authorization to trigger the Scorched Earth protocol," Celeste replied, her fingers moving in a blur across the mechanical keyboard. "You have it. Burn them to the ground, Celeste." Celeste dove into the digital abyss. She bypassed the standard corporate firewalls and accessed the deeply buried, illegal back door she had installed in the Smith shipping network years ago. A fail-safe she had created just in case their legitimate partners ever decided to turn rogue. First, she intercepted the $85 million suspended in the swift clearing process. Utilizing a series of automated shell companies she had pre-registered in the Cayman Islands, she slammed a freeze on the Julius Baer transaction, aggressively redirecting the capital back into Damien's heavily encrypted holding accounts. But she wasn't done. Cameron Smith had humiliated her in front of the city's elite. He had made her feel small, ugly, and worthless. It was time to return the favor. "I'm into the Smith family's personal holding company," Celeste narrated, her eyes locked on the scrolling data. "Accessing their private portfolios at Banque Privée Edmond de Rothschild. Richard Smith has $300 million in liquid assets." "Take it all," Damien commanded, pouring himself another scotch and watching her work like a man mesmerized. "I can't steal it without triggering Interpol," Celeste muttered, her brilliant mind working at lightning speed. "But I can margin call them. I'm aggressively shorting their legitimate shipping stocks using their own collateral. I'm dumping 3 million shares of Smith shipping onto the open Asian markets. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opens tomorrow morning, their stock will be virtually worthless." Damien chuckled, a dark, vibrating sound. "You're liquidating a dynasty." "I'm draining their operational capital," Celeste corrected, slamming the enter key with a satisfying clack. "I've just rerouted their remaining liquid cash into a frozen escrow account tied up in fictitious international litigation. Richard and Cameron Smith cannot buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone flee the country. They are completely bankrupt." She leaned back into the heavy leather executive chair, breathing heavily. The sheer adrenaline of the digital warfare left her flushed. She looked at the clock. It was 3:14 a.m. In less than an hour, the Smith family went from untouchable billionaires to destitute criminals with a massive, unpayable debt to the Moretti family. "It's done," Celeste whispered, taking her hands off the keyboard. Damien set his glass down and walked slowly around the desk. He stopped beside her chair, gently taking her hand. He pulled her up so she was standing in front of him, the silk robe pooling slightly on the floor. "You are terrifying," Damien said softly, his ice-blue eyes burning with unfiltered adoration. "They underestimated me," Celeste said, her voice shaking slightly, the reality of what she had just done settling in. "Cameron saw a fat assistant. He thought I was an easy mark." "Cameron is a dead man," Damien corrected smoothly. "His father will likely hand him over to the Morettis by noon to settle the debt you just created. But that doesn't matter. What matters is you." He pulled her flush against his solid chest. Celeste gasped, feeling the hard lines of his muscles against her soft curves. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to hide her body. She didn't want to shrink or suck in her stomach. The way Damien held her, with absolute undeniable hunger, made her feel incredibly powerful. "I don't want you sitting at a desk outside my office anymore, Celeste," Damien murmured, his lips brushing against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. Celeste froze, a brief flash of panic hitting her. "Are you firing me?" Damien pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, a genuine smile breaking through his usually stoic expression. "I am promoting you. You are my equal, Celeste. You built this empire just as much as I did. You belong by my side, not as an assistant, as my partner, as my queen. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, demanding kiss. It wasn't hesitant or polite. It was acclaiming. Celeste melted against him, her arms wrapping around his broad shoulders, kissing him back with all the suppressed passion and longing she had harbored for 5 long years. When they finally broke apart, Celeste was breathless, her heart soaring. The pain and humiliation of the ballroom were entirely erased, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. The next morning, the Chicago financial district was in utter chaos. The news cycle was dominated by the catastrophic collapse of the Smith shipping empire. Rumors swirled about federal investigations, frozen assets, and Richard Smith suffering a stress-induced heart attack. Cameron Smith had reportedly vanished, fleeing the city in a desperate bid to escape the wrath of the syndicates he had failed to pay. Meanwhile, high above the frantic city, the doors to the Russo Syndicate's executive boardroom opened. The capos, lieutenants, and financial advisors immediately fell silent, standing up to show their respect. Damien Russo walked in, wearing his signature tailored suit, radiating absolute power. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, his hand firmly resting on the small of her back, was Celeste Wilson. She wore a stunning, custom-tailored scarlet dress that proudly accentuated her heavy curves, her dark hair falling perfectly over her shoulders. She looked sharp, confident, and entirely untouchable. Damien led her to the head of the massive mahogany table. Instead of taking the single executive chair, he gestured to a newly placed, identical leather chair right beside his own. Celeste sat down, opening her secure tablet, her brown eyes sweeping over the most dangerous men in Chicago. No one snickered. No one questioned her presence. They looked at her with absolute, unwavering respect and fear. Damien remained standing for a moment, looking at the men who ran his streets. "Gentlemen," Damien said, his voice echoing in the silent boardroom, "meet your new boss. If you loved this story of vengeance, power, and unapologetic romance, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button to support Celeste's fierce journey from an underestimated assistant to a brilliant syndicate queen. Share this video with your friends who love a good mafia drama packed with intense plot twists, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, high-stakes romantic stories. Leave a comment below on what you want to see next.